I never expected betrayal to come from the man my daughter married. But the day I learned he'd tried to seize my entire $320,000 retirement portfolio, something inside me went cold. I'm Mark. I'm 58. And this is the story of how my own son-in-law tried to gut my future and walk away smiling. If you've ever trusted someone a little too much, stay with me. What happened next changed the way I look at family forever. I've always lived quietly. I worked the same job for 34 years, saved every extra dollar, and kept my life simple enough that nothing ever really spun out of control. My daughter Emily was my pride. She was thoughtful, steady, and always the kind of kid who checked on me even when life got busy. When she married Kyle, I tried, really tried, to see the good in him. He was charming on the surface, confident in a way that felt rehearsed, and obsessed with talking about money he didn't actually have. But I ignored the red flags. I told myself that if Emily loved him, then there had to be something solid under all that shine. For a while, things were fine. We didn't see each other as much, but that was normal for newlyweds. Then Kyle started asking little questions, subtle things, almost innocent at first. How much does a guy even need to retire these days? Do you keep everything at one bank? You ever think about consolidating? I didn't think much of it until the questions got sharper, more specific. And Emily, my sweet Emily, got quieter every time money came up. I brushed it off as stress. I didn't want to believe anything worse. But then I noticed something strange. A piece of my mail had been opened, a statement I never saw arrive, a missing envelope that should have contained a routine portfolio update. And when I logged into my account, I saw something that froze me where I sat. There had been an access attempt. Someone had tried to get into my retirement portal. Someone with my full name, my date of birth, and disturbingly close guesses to my security questions. Someone who shouldn't know any of that. In that moment, I felt a shift, a fracture I couldn't ignore, so I took a slow breath and decided to watch closely, quietly, carefully, because if the person behind this was who I feared, this wasn't just curiosity, it was a plan. I didn't sleep much the night I saw that access attempt. My mind kept looping through the same questions, the same uneasy details I had ignored for too long. Kyle's sudden interest in my accounts, Emily's nervous glances whenever he spoke, the missing mail, the password reset email I'd shrugged off as a glitch. No, it wasn't a glitch. It was a trail. And now that I finally saw it, I couldn't look away. The next morning, I walked into my bank like a man carrying a weight he hadn't earned. The lobby was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every thought louder. I sat with a representative I'd known for years, a patient man named Willis, and asked him one simple question. Can you tell me who tried to access my retirement account? He looked at me for a long second. Then he sighed. That alone told me everything. There was an attempt, he said. Someone used your personal details. Someone close enough to know the basics. He paused. Someone who tried to guess your old security questions, not the ones we changed last year. My chest tightened. Only 3 people knew those old answers. Me, Emily, Kyle. I didn't want to believe it. Even when the shape of the truth stood right in front of me, I kept thinking. Maybe it was some kind of mistake. Maybe the world wasn't as cruel as it felt in that moment. But then Willis leaned in and lowered his voice. Mark, whoever it was, tried to authorize a transfer form. It didn't go through, but they got close. My mouth went dry. Close how? They had your old signature on file. The world stopped. My signature. A copy. Somewhere. I walked out of the bank with a hollow feeling in my gut. The kind that comes from realizing someone had planned this. Studied you. Watched you. And the worst part was knowing it wasn't a stranger. That evening, I went to Emily's house. Not for confrontation, not for answers. I just needed to look her in the eyes. Needed to see if she knew, if she was part of this. She opened the door like she always did. Warm, soft, a little tired. But there was something behind her smile. Something tight. Dad, everything okay? I almost said yes. I almost lied to keep the peace. But peace wasn't an option anymore. Emily, I need to ask you something, I said. Has Kyle said anything about my accounts? Anything at all? Her face shifted. Not in surprise, but in dread. Dad, I don't want to be in the middle. And that alone was my answer. I felt it in my chest like a slow bruise spreading. Before she could finish, Kyle's voice cut through the hallway. Loud, confident, annoyed. "Mark, you don't need to interrogate anyone. I'm just trying to help you get organized." Organized. That word again. He'd used it before, when he asked about my bank, when he brought up consolidating, when he mentioned retirement strategies I never asked for. He looked at me like a man already planning the victory speech, a man who thought he was smarter than me. I kept my voice calm. "Did you try to access my portfolio?" He smirked. It wasn't denial. It wasn't shock. Just arrogance. Why would I need to do that, Mark? He was lying, and he wasn't even good at it. Emily stood between us, torn, her eyes glassy with fear or guilt. I couldn't tell which. All I knew was that something inside my ribs felt like it was starting to crack. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply nodded once, stepped back, and said the only thing I could say. "I understand." Because I finally did. On the drive home, the streetlights blurred past me like quiet witnesses. My hands were steady on the wheel, even though everything inside me felt like a tremor. This wasn't confusion anymore, or paranoia, or a misunderstanding. Someone was coming for my future. Someone who thought I was too old, too trusting, too slow to catch on. But they forgot something important about me. I don't confront people. I don't argue. I prepare. And the moment I walked back into my house, I knew exactly what I had to do next. I didn't turn on any lights when I walked back into my house. I just stood there in the dark, letting the quiet settle over me like a heavy blanket. My daughter's voice still echoed in my head, the way she couldn't meet my eyes, the way Kyle stood behind her like a man who already owned something that wasn't his. I took a long breath and sat down at my dining table. Everything I needed to understand, every clue I had ignored, spread itself out in my mind. The missing envelope, the access attempt, the signature they shouldn't have had, Emily's fear, Kyle's arrogance. There was only one conclusion. He wasn't just trying to steal from me. He believed he would succeed, and that meant one thing. He knew something. Something he wasn't supposed to know. I pulled out my old safe from the hall closet. It wasn't fancy, just steel and stubborn hinges, but it held everything that mattered. Birth certificate, insurance policies, original banking agreements, even the old folder my late wife insisted I keep, labeled retirement founding documents. I hadn't opened that folder in years, but tonight it felt like the first place I needed to look. I sat at the table, the folder under the warm glow of a single lamp. When I opened it, dust lifted into the air like memories. Dozens of papers sat inside, statements, contracts, account updates, all written back when I first opened the retirement portfolio. And then I found it, the original signature card, the one I had forgotten existed. Back then, my financial advisor had insisted I sign a dual authority form. Something about protecting clients during system transitions. I remembered thinking it was pointless, but I signed it anyway. That form required, not suggested, not preferred, but required in clear bold letters. Original signature on file must be physically verified for any retirement transfers exceeding $50,000. Not digitally verified, not scanned, not copied. Original, ink, paper, my signature. Not a photograph of it, not a digital trace, the real one, stored at the bank in their physical archives. I stared at that clause for a long time, feeling something inside me shift. It wasn't comfort. Not yet. It was possibility. Because even if Kyle somehow had my signature, even if he forged something close, it wouldn't match the original ink they kept sealed in the vault. A laugh, small and sharp, escaped me. Not because I found it funny, but because some part of me felt the faint spark of survival again. The next morning I went back to the bank, but I didn't go to the main counter. I waited for Willis to arrive. When he saw me, he walked over immediately. "Mark, you all right?" "No," I said honestly, "but I'm getting there." He nodded and we went into his office. I explained everything. The mail, the access attempts, the situation with Kyle. I kept my voice steady because breaking wouldn't help me now. When I finally set the original signature card on his desk, his brows shot up. "I didn't know you still had this," he whispered. "Didn't either," I said, "but it's going to matter." Willis turned the form over, reading the clause out loud. He looked almost relieved. "You understand what this means, right?" he said. "No one can move a dime without that physical match. Not a penny." "Yes," I said quietly. "I just need you to do one thing." He looked up. "What's that?" "Don't mention this meeting to anyone, even internally." And if anyone tries another transfer under my name, I want to be here when it happens." He nodded. "Consider it done." Walking out of the bank, I felt something I hadn't felt since this started. Control. But control wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed proof. I needed them to fully reveal themselves. So I did something that surprised even me. I waited. For 2 days, I didn't contact Emily. I didn't show up unannounced. I didn't call Kyle out. I acted like a man who had dropped the whole thing, like a man who believed their lies. It worked. On the 3rd day, just past noon, my phone buzzed with an automated alert from the bank. A strange attempt to access my retirement plan had been flagged. The alert wasn't a full warning, just a message saying, "Verification request initiated. Please confirm this was you." I hadn't initiated anything. I grabbed my keys and drove fast. Faster than a man my age should be driving. My heart kept a hard rhythm against my ribs the entire way. When I stepped into the bank, Willis was waiting. "They're here," he said. "They?" I asked, though I already knew. He nodded toward the glass office on the left. Kyle, sitting there like he owned the place, trying to look calm, but his knee was bouncing. He held a clipboard with a printed form on it, my name typed neatly at the top. I felt heat rise in my chest, not anger but something colder. Resolve. Willis escorted me to the office and opened the door. Kyle looked up and the color drained from his face like water leaking from a cracked bowl. "Mark," he said, "what a surprise." "Yes," I said softly. "I imagine it is." He started scrambling for explanations, but Willis cut him off. "There's a problem with the signature," he said. Kyle stiffened. "What do you mean? I provided what you needed." Willis shook his head slowly. "No, you provided a copy. We require the original, the one on file, and it doesn't match this." He placed the form on the table. Even from a distance, I could see it wasn't my handwriting. "Not even close." Kyle swallowed hard. Sweat touched his forehead. "Look, this is a misunderstanding." I raised a hand. "No, Kyle, it's not." The room went silent. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't confused. I was done, and he knew it. This wasn't the trap closing. This was the moment he realized it had been closed long before he walked in. Kyle didn't speak at first. He just sat there, jaw tight, eyes darting from me to Willis and back, as if searching for an exit that didn't exist. The office felt too small for how fast the truth was closing in. I could hear the faint hum of the bank's air system, the muffled steps outside the glass walls, even the subtle squeak of Kyle's shoe against the floor. He finally tried to force a smile. "Mark, come on. You know I'd never try to take your money. This is all just a mix-up." His voice cracked. Not dramatically, just enough to betray him. Willis slid the forged form across the table. "I need you to confirm this is your signature," he said to me. I didn't even sit down. I leaned in, looked at the paper for half a second, and shook my head. "It's not mine," I said quietly, "not even close." Kyle shifted, his face tightening. "You can't just say that, Mark. People's signatures change." I cut him off with a calm I didn't know I possessed. "No, they don't change into someone else's handwriting." The room fell still again. Even Willis seemed to feel the weight of the words. "Kyle," he said, far more formally now. "We also compared this with the original ink signature on file. The one from when Mark opened the account. It didn't match. At all." Kyle blinked. "What original signature?" And there it was. The slip, the proof he didn't know about the clause, the moment his confidence cracked open like cheap plaster. He had studied me. He had copied my signature. He had researched my accounts. But he had not known about the archive. Willis folded his hands. "Any transfer over $50,000 requires the original ink signature. No exceptions." Kyle's mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again. "But Emily said—" He stopped. And in that tiny hesitation, in that barely there stutter, I understood something I had suspected but hadn't wanted to face. Emily knew. Maybe not the whole plan, maybe not how far he intended to go. But she knew enough. I steadied myself with a slow breath. "Kyle," I said quietly, "how long have you been planning this?" He didn't answer. Instead, he tried to regain footing. Look, Mark, you've got plenty saved. More than enough for someone your age. I just thought maybe you weren't managing it right. Maybe Emily and I could help." "You mean control it?" I said. He flinched like I had hit him. I stayed perfectly still, perfectly calm, because the truth didn't need volume. It just needed space. You tried to move $320,000, I said, and you did it behind my back, behind your wife's back, behind every ounce of trust I ever tried to give you. He pressed his lips together, then snapped. Emily wanted more stability. She wanted... My hand tightened at my side. Don't you dare use her as a shield. He looked away. Willis cleared his throat softly. We're required to document this attempt. A fraudulent transfer request is a serious matter. Kyle's eyes widened. Fraudulent? No, it was just a misunderstanding. It was fraud, I said gently, because you knew it wasn't yours to touch. He looked at me then, truly looked, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw fear, not anger, not arrogance, just a man realizing he'd walked into a fire he couldn't extinguish. Please don't press charges, he whispered. I didn't answer right away, not because I wanted him to sweat, but because I wanted the silence to show him what he'd done, what it meant, what it cost. Finally, I spoke. That depends on what happens next. He swallowed. What do you want? I want you to tell Emily the truth, I said. All of it, not your version, not a softened version, the truth. His face drained. I can't. You will. When he didn't respond, Willis stepped forward. You two can finish this elsewhere, he said. But Kyle, you need to understand. If you try to touch this account again, it will trigger an automatic legal review. Kyle stood, but his legs were shaky. As we walked out of the office, I felt the eyes of strangers passing over us, everyone sensing that something intense had happened, even if they didn't know what. Outside, sunlight hit the sidewalk in harsh white patches. Kyle stopped at the curb, rubbing his face. This wasn't supposed to go this way, he muttered. I tilted my head. How was it supposed to go? He didn't answer. Instead, he said something that made my stomach twist. Emily told me she didn't think you'd notice. Silence. Thick, heavy, cold. I felt something in my chest tighten, not from anger but from grief. The kind that comes from a truth you can't unhear. Why would she say that? I asked. He hesitated. Because she thought you weren't paying attention anymore, that you were slowing down. I closed my eyes for a moment. So that's what they thought, that I was old, tired, easy to outsmart. When I spoke again, my voice was steady. Go home, Kyle. Tell her what you did. If you lie to her again, you and I won't have another conversation. I'll just file the report. His breathing hitched. I'll tell her. Good. I stepped back, letting the space between us widen. He turned and walked away, faster than he probably intended, like a man trying to escape his own shadow. I watched him go, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see the moment he understood he wasn't the one in control anymore. And as the distance grew between us, I felt something inside me settle. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But the ground had shifted. For the first time, he wasn't the one holding the secrets. I didn't hear from Emily that night. Not a call, not a text, just silence. The kind that makes a house feel bigger than it is. I tried to sleep, but my mind kept replaying the moment Kyle said she didn't think I'd notice. That one sentence felt heavier than everything else he'd done. Money is money. I can earn, save, rebuild. But hearing that my own daughter thought I was slipping, that I was too distracted or too worn down to protect myself, that was different. That was personal. Around 10 the next morning, my phone finally buzzed. It was Emily. Dad, can we talk? Her voice was already breaking like she'd been crying for a long time. I didn't ask questions. I just told her yes. When I arrived at their house, the door was already open. Emily stood in the living room, arms folded tightly across her chest, her eyes puffy, the skin around them red. Kyle sat on the couch looking like he'd been awake all night, hair a mess, shirt wrinkled, expression drained of the arrogance he always wore like armor. Emily looked at me first, then at him, then back at me. He told me, she whispered. I nodded slowly. Good. She swallowed, fighting for steady breaths. Dad, why didn't you tell me what was happening? Why didn't you come to me first? I could have said a lot of things, but I kept it simple, because I wanted to believe you didn't know. Her face crumpled. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, covering her face with shaking hands. That hurt more than anything else. Watching my daughter try to breathe through betrayal she didn't commit, but still got dragged into. Kyle didn't move, didn't speak. Eventually, Emily lifted her head enough to look at him. "You were going to steal from my father," she said softly. $320,000. You were going to drain his account and just... What? Pretend it was something else? Tell me he approved it? Kyle rubbed his forehead. I just wanted us to be secure." She stared at him. "Secure? By destroying my father's future?" He didn't answer, and she let out a sound that wasn't quite a cry, wasn't quite a breath, something trapped between the two. I finally sat down across from them. "Emily," I said gently, "I don't blame you, but I need one answer. What made you think I wouldn't notice if something happened to my retirement?" Her eyes shifted away. "Kyle said, he said you weren't tracking things anymore, that you were letting stuff slip, that you were overwhelmed." I felt that like a blade between the ribs, not the words, her belief in them. "Do you think that?" I asked quietly. She shook her head fast, tears filling her eyes. "No, I don't. I think I was scared to question him, scared to admit something felt off. I didn't want to start a fight." She looked at the floor. Sometimes I thought he was helping. Then I thought something wasn't right. But I didn't want to believe he'd do anything like this. I nodded. "I understand." And I did. Love makes people overlook a lot. Too much sometimes. Finally, I turned to Kyle. "You owe her more than apologies," I said. "You owe her honesty and accountability." He clenched his jaw. "So what now? You going to press charges?" "That depends," I said calmly, "on what you do from this moment on. And I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about her." Emily straightened, wiping her cheeks. "Dad, he needs to face consequences." Kyle's eyes widened at her words, but she didn't look away. I continued. "I already documented the attempt with the bank. They've got the forged signature, the failed verification, the transfer request. If I file the full report, it goes straight to the fraud investigation unit." Kyle swallowed hard. "Please." "This isn't about begging," I said. "It's about responsibility." Emily inhaled deeply. "I want him out of the house," she said suddenly. "I want him gone, today." Kyle whipped his head toward her. "Emily, come on." "No." Her voice didn't crack this time. It was steady. "You lied to me. You put me in danger. You risked my father's life savings. You made me believe he was slipping when he wasn't. I can't live with someone who would do that." The silence after that was absolute. Kyle stood slowly, like a man realizing there was nothing left to argue. He grabbed a backpack from the floor, already packed, I realized, and headed for the door. At the doorway, he turned back toward me. "Are you going to report me?" I held his gaze. "I won't. If you leave quietly, take responsibility for what you did, and never try to contact me again. Not for money, not for forgiveness, nothing." He nodded stiffly. Then he was gone. Emily collapsed onto the couch, her shoulders shaking. I sat beside her, not touching her at first, just letting her breathe. After a minute, she leaned against me. "I'm so sorry, Dad." I hugged her gently. "You trusted the wrong person. That isn't a crime. But now, you get to rebuild, stronger." She nodded into my shoulder. "Promise me you'll tell me next time, if something's wrong." "I promise." We stayed like that for a long, quiet moment. When I finally left her house, the sun was beginning to set. The sky was streaked with gold and deep orange, like someone had painted warmth over a day that had been anything but warm. I got into my car, closed the door, and let out a slow breath. Not relief, not victory, just peace. A peace I hadn't felt since this began. Kyle was gone. My future was safe. And my daughter, though shaken, was finally on the right side of the truth. As I drove home, I realized something. People think revenge is about striking back. But sometimes, the real revenge is simply surviving the storm, standing stronger than the people who tried to break you. And that's exactly what I did. If my story felt familiar to you, if you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or quietly pushed aside, stay with this channel. There's always another story to tell, another voice that needs to be heard, another battle to win. Stick around. The next chapter might be yours.